we have a minute until it's officially going to start, but we can get started. I mean, I definitely want to talk about the Diddy thing. That was a great suggestion. I will also say, my post today was about whether and to what extent sexism in schools explains why boys do worse at every level.
Yeah.
And I have gotten a lot of feedback on that. A lot of it positive, a lot of it negative. Like I put I make a video just to summarize what the post is, what every post is about to promote it. And I put these videos on YouTube, TikTok, and Instagram. And the TikTok is at 4,500 views, which is a lot for me. And it's just people are just
So synopsize what it is that you posted about and what you're positing about boys not doing well.
Yeah. So, I mean, we've known for a few decades now that girls outperform boys in education. So this is they show up to kindergarten less prepared, and then through post-secondary, they do worse on average than girls do. And that's why when it comes to affirmative action, or however you want to put it, preferential admissions policies for colleges, especially the Ivy League schools, they actually favor boys, male applicants. So there's a canard, and it may or may not be true. It's probably true that the biggest beneficiaries of affirmative action have been white women at the college level. And like I said, maybe that's true, maybe it's not. But for the past few decades, it's been men. And so I just somebody was posting about something on Twitter, and so I just posted that fact. Actually, men are the biggest beneficiaries of DEI in college admissions. And then a lot of people could buy that was true, and by people I mean men, on Twitter, that yes, boys do not perform as well as girls in education, and so their applications are less strong to college, but that's because the K through 12 education system discriminates against boys, that it's biased against boys, that something like 90% of U.S. teachers are female, and women have a preference for girls, and that's why boys do worse in school. And so I was just I don't think that's true. It's certainly not been my experience. That's not what I've heard. That doesn't ring true to me, but maybe it is. And so I started looking into the evidence just to confirm my priors, and yeah, there is some evidence of teacher bias in favor of girls, in certain schools and certain subjects at certain times. That you can find those studies. But the bulk of the evidence is there's really not a lot of evidence that the entire system is biased in favor of girls. And there's really, really not, the evidence does not point to, and this bias is so strong that it explains the achievement gap. And so the post just kind of went through this is why we can say that gender bias doesn't explain the gap in achievement. And this is what actually does explain much better the gap in achievement. And the two big things that explain the gap when you actually look at the data are boys are more harmed by a problematic home environment. So boys are more delicate than girls. So things that make it hard to do well in school, or at least are associated with doing poorly in school, growing up in poverty, growing up in a single parent home, not having access to same-sex role models,
any kind of abuse or any kind of disruption, divorce,
correct.
All that stuff.
Having a parent who's incarcerated, all of these adverse childhood experiences just seem to impact boys a lot more than girls. So when you look at how girls do in school, these adverse childhood experiences, these hardships don't seem to have a big impact. For boys, they have a huge impact. So again, that's why boys show up to the first day of kindergarten less prepared to learn than girls. And So how does the systemic bias against boys in education explain that? The other thing that makes it clear that it's not a bias problem is that gay boys actually do better than girls on average. So if the system is biased against boys, how are the gay boys overcoming this bias? And what that points to is the other big reason for the gap between boys and girls, and that's that uh, in places where girls have access to education, doing well in school has been coded feminine. And so when you look across the world, everywhere where girls are allowed to compete with boys in education, they outperform boys. And um, and that's because across the world where boys and girls both go to school, education becomes feminine coded. And so boys don't do well in things that they think uh, will make them feminine to try hard in. And then the other way that gender kind of screws up boys' academic performance is that, and this is true even where boys go to school only with boys and are taught by men. So again, we know that it's not the feminization of schools because this happens even where schools have not been feminized. Um, but But yeah, so but because where women do teach boys, where these boys um, take in this idea of what masculinity means, part of what masculinity means is not femininity, and part of what it means in a hierarchical culture is that women are not leaders. And so these boys who are steeped in this masculinity bullshit, like don't see these women as leaders and people who they should like follow and respect, which makes it hard for them to do well in school. So it's masculinity uh, and this delicacy, this lack of resilience to hardship that much better explains boys doing worse in school than girls on average.
Well, that's interesting because as we've mentioned a couple of times when we're here, we're from different generations. And so I grew up in a generation where boy girls did not do well at math and science because that was a boys subject, and girls did well in, you know, the humanities subjects. And they were also, it's still, I don't know as a percentage because you're the researcher and I'm just the person who comments on your research. But the thing is that it was far more of my classmates who were men went to university than women. I have lots of classmates who got married, didn't finish school, and the professions that were seen as really acceptable for women at the time, nursing, teaching, those kind of pink jobs, right? Pink collar jobs at the time. And they were thought to be okay professions for moms to have, for women to grow into. So I can see that when they changed how we thought about women having higher education and all that, those numbers went up. So it could be, right, that they were subdued against men because the societal expectation was different when I graduated high school in the 70s. But it men by nature, people by nature probably haven't changed much. So what explains the gap between the percentage of men who graduate high school who go on to higher education now versus the men when I was a kid? Because that lack of resiliency, the masculinity culture, all those things would have been present, I would think.
I would say that probably the percentage of boys who graduate high school and go on to college is probably pretty steady. I actually don't know, but I would imagine like if you compare today to 1970, it's probably up a little bit. What's the real thing that's changed is is the percentage of women who go
Right.
from high school to college. So, what's interesting is that as far as I can tell, the only thing that defines masculinity, that's a feature of masculinity everywhere and throughout time, is that it's not femininity.
It's the opposite. Whatever the cultural norm for femininity is. So if you live in a culture where women farm and men cook, then men don't want to farm, and
Right.
because there are some cultures like that. So, oh,
Right. And so when you look at what researchers call the tipping point of various professions, and this is where when the profession becomes a certain percentage female,
mm-hmm.
it's like a free fall. Men just run
They,
away from that profession, and the prestige goes down and the pay goes down as men flee, and it's a self-perpetuating cycle. And so that's part of what's happened to education, is that as it's become, as women have entered in and done well, it's be, it's become, it's hit a tipping point where there are still men who do it and do well in it, but um, but a lot of men flee it either by dropping out, not going on to college, not doing their homework, just being disruptive in class, whatever it takes to perform masculinity they will do, and that means not doing the feminine thing, which is trying hard and doing well in school.
yeah. And so, I mean, we've talked about education, right? And the pay, the the profession in other weeks, the professions that men don't go into because they're thought of as supplemental income. They're not high enough paid. They've been traditionally women. So that kind of plays into that, because we've talked about masculinity as being the primary breadwinner, the higher earner. All of those things are masculine attributes. So teaching would naturally be, or higher education might be one of those things. So tell me, you said you had a lot of views. What are the comments coming in? Like, how do people react to what you've posited in the article?
Well, it's a bunch of different things. It's a lot of people talking about other related issues, which I have a post written and scheduled to talk about these issues, but they include like the finding that boys mature more slowly than girls, their brains develop more slowly than girls, and they're positing this as an explanation for why boys do worse. Um, Richard Reeves has brought this up. You know, I'm not going to argue with the findings.
Mhm.
I will say that other people are bringing up that maybe part of the reason boys' brains develop more slowly is because boys are not expected to display the kind of impulse control and conscientiousness and other brain developing requirements that we put on girls. Um, so things like that, people are bringing up like the lack of men teaching in K through 12 as part of the problem. They're bringing up the racial differences and how like all this applies much even more to black and brown boys, which is true. Um, they're bringing up their own experiences with like some people claiming their teachers were biased against boys, other people claiming and I've several like teachers have commented saying like, no, like female teachers are biased in favor of boys actually, and that's what I remember reading when I read the studies many years ago, and it makes sense to me. That's kind of what I saw as the adults around me in the South were biased in favor of boys, if anything.
Huh.
Um, so it just there's a
Yeah.
lot to say. Oh, and then the other thing is like people are bringing up that you know boys are just not like biologically suited for modern education. And so that's like the real focus of the post that I've written and I haven't published yet, which is like, yes, there is evidence that boys are um not every boy obviously, but on average a greater percentage of boys have biological impulses that are not the most compatible with like sitting down, listening, diligently working on something, not moving their bodies, not talking, listening, taking
Mhm.
instruction. Um, yeah, I mean, I don't want to give the whole thing away, but it's basically
Yeah.
like, yeah, that's always been true. Like both of those things, like
Yeah.
Everywhere throughout time, getting educated is requiring sitting your ass down, shutting the fuck up, and like taking instruction. And everywhere throughout time, most boys haven't been able to do that and haven't done it.
And that's
So
another discussion, right, for another day about why are we educating people the same way we did when Laura Ingalls Wilder was, a student, a teacher on Little House on the Prairie, right? You've got
we're
the
doing it the
first
same way we did it when Socrates was the teacher.
exactly.
Like and guess what? Socrates didn't teach bottom half boys. Like that didn't happen. So like let's take a tip from 1,000 years ago.
Yeah. But that's a discussion probably for another day.
Yeah. But I want to leave time. We got a comment. Let's see. Emma said, I just released a podcast discussing this topic. What is healthy masculinity? I think it's so important to talk about what healthy masculinity is versus the focus on toxic masculinity. Oh man, I have a lot of thoughts on toxic and healthy masculinity.
I had an interesting conversation with my husband today. We went on a big date outing. We went to Costco and Aldi. But while we were out, we talked about that, and I was telling him about how we talked about how the incidence of cheating and violence and all that goes up in a home where the woman is a higher earner. And so I've been a higher earner than my husband several times. Right now he's retired and I'm still working. And his first wife was a college professor. And so there was a time when she made significantly more than he did. And but he is the exception. I mean, he likes it. He likes, I married someone for their earning potential. It's a joke, but after we talked and I talked to him about it, it is an exception because there's plenty of data to support that. And it's what is the difference between positive masculinity and toxic masculinity?
Yeah. And there
Or
are
the emphasis.
like thousands and hundreds of thousands of exceptions. It's not like exceptions are rare. We're
Yeah.
just talking about on average. Yeah, these marriages where the woman is the breadwinner are worse than marriages where the man is the breadwinner. And like that's because of stigma. I mean,
How do you
I'm really
define positive masculinity? If we're going to look at that and the comment says, well, why not emphasize that? What is it that defines that? We know what toxic masculinity looks like, right? That's easy to define.
kind of. I mean, I'm of two minds because on the one hand, it's like what I want to say is why do we need to gender traits? Like why do we need gender to exist? Like okay, let's say healthy masculinity is like courage and honesty and aggression when it's appropriate, whatever. Don't we want everyone to have those qualities? Like why? I've yet to hear a coherent definition of gender that has nothing to do with genitalia, right? Like people are like, oh, well, your gender isn't your biological sex. Like I know that because sex differences describe a reality. People who are born assigned female at birth, scientifically, when you measure it, tend to act like this, tend to have these other characteristics. That's just an observation of reality. Gender is different because it's an ought. Sex is an is, gender is an ought. Boys don't cry is not a description of reality. It's a norm. It's saying boys aren't supposed to cry. Well, what's a boy? It's someone whose state of being we associate with owning a penis. Like, I understand that they're different concepts, but to pretend like they're totally separate from each other, like, that's wild. Like, no, like, gender is a concept that is inextricably linked from genitalia. So the idea that like my personality and like the choices I make in life and what I'm expected to do and the role I'm supposed to have in my marriage is like hinges on whether you assume I have a vagina, like it's actually quite insane when you spend 2 seconds thinking about it. And so But then there's the issue of like, okay, then what? So you say gender is stupid, it's not worth the trouble, but like our whole society is created around gender. It's one of the most salient things about us. It's what we're taught we treat from the moment children are born, we treat them differently based on whether we think they have a vagina or a penis. Like,
Well, that's interesting because intersex people are an interesting concept, right? So throughout the history of that, people are looking at an externally visible attribute, and often doctors would say, okay, because this is long before they could do genetic testing to see what your chromosomes look like. And so they look at a baby, and if it looks more like male genitalia, then raise this kid a boy. And if it looks more like female genitalia, raise this kid as a girl. And now we have all kinds of different ways to, we have genetic, you can look at all that stuff. And it has been so attributed to physical characteristics. And then is the interesting idea. Of course, these are people, intersex people are a small minority, but clearly that has been just how we've done it in history, right? At least in our Western culture, we have said, you look like a girl down there, you're a girl. You look like a boy down there, you're a boy. And now there's all these attributes we expect from you.
well, anyway, from my understanding, it was actually worse than that, at least for a long time, where if you didn't look like exactly what they expected a boy to look like,
Mm-hmm.
it was easier to create a vagina than a penis. So they would cut off whatever you had and you were a girl. So
Yeah.
you had all these people who like got it cut off and were raised as girls and like were like, what is wrong with me? Like I don't feel like a girl. And then find out as adults like, oh, you actually are intersex and we
Yeah.
just decided for you that you were gonna be a girl.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, and it's so interesting because it's like, yeah, we do have all these tests, but like this whole idea that even sex differences is like simple is really belied by the whole trans or not even it's transvestigations of athletes who claim to be female.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's like, well, it seems like it would be a simple thing, like you would just do a test. But there are actually a bunch of tests because it's not actually simple. There are a bunch of markers to look at,
So,
and there's argument over like which marker is most important.
and I was just trying to make a point that we we make a decision and then we ascribe attributes. But that's interesting that you point out because I follow a woman who has a type of intersex condition where she has an XY chromosome. She had testes internally. Her body can't process testosterone. It turned the testosterone into estrogen. She is a woman, period. And so, right, if she were to go compete, and she was told as a college athlete, do not take a test. Don't let them test you because it will come back as XY and they will say you can't compete, which she doesn't use testosterone. Her body doesn't use it. It converts it to estrogen. And when she was 15, they took out these inner testes that were uh, internal, and she's had to be on estrogen supplements. And she's a journalist, and so she's real open about talking about it. But the interesting thing is that people made decisions and didn't give informed consent. And she's young; she's 40, so it's not like this happened 70 years ago. So
Yeah.
you're right. To your point.
Yeah, so I think I'm a big believer in most things in incremental change. And so I look at healthy masculinity as like, okay, I would say I look at gender as a disease, like a mind virus. Like I look at the way that it keeps boys from performing well in education. I look at the way that it harms people in all kinds of ways, but we're probably not going to be able to eradicate it overnight. And so to the extent that we can look at it and say, like, okay, I think this is a fundamentally, like, messed up concept, but, like, maybe we and the thing about masculinity, and this is a thing that's really, I think, underappreciated, is when I said, like, the only thing that's steady throughout space and time is that masculinity is not femininity. So much about masculinity is extremely context dependent. Like, in the 1800s in Europe, domesticity was not coded feminine. It was equally masculine and feminine, right?
Mhm.
That's like a modern invention. Men were the ones who invented it and were the first to wear high heels. Like, all these things that we think are, like, really core and eternal and steady throughout space and time between masculinity and femininity are not. And so that means that it will continue to change. And so to the extent that we want to change it in a direction that's, like, helpful, like, I'm for that. But I also just want us to, like, recognize the reality that, like, we don't need to gender things, and maybe people looking real far into the future can be like, I don't know. I don't know if we want to do that anymore. But anyway, I did want to talk to you about the Diddy verdict. You brought up wanting to talk about that. I think that's a really important topic and a good one to address. And I wanted to start it out, like, with some of my thoughts and then give you the floor, and then, like, obviously you guys watching, please tell us what you are thinking and feeling. I want to, like, talk about what I felt, and then I want to talk about something that one of my family members said. I as a prostitute, which is what I'm calling myself now, as a former prostitute, uh, it just really annoyed the heck out of me that the prosecutors brought prostitution charges against Diddy as opposed to, I don't know, assault, rape, kidnapping. Um, the prostitution angle is, like, the least problematic part of the
Yep.
whole thing. It also brings up the issue with the whole, like, concept of sex trafficking.
Mhm.
Um, the problem with sex trafficking, trafficking just means taking from one place to another, illegally. Uh, like, the issue is the lack of consent, not that it involved sex work or that they
Mhm.
went from one place to another. It's that she was being threatened into doing things she did not. These two women, at least,
Yes.
were being threatened into doing things that they didn't want to do. So, um, I hate that, and uh, I think this is just one reason why we really need to, like, take a step back from, like, why prostitution is illegal. Where sex trafficking is just at the turn of the century, from the 1800s to the 1900s, there was a lot of social change. A lot of women, especially white women, were moving from their family farms into the cities. They were out of the control of their nuclear families, their extended families. Um, there was a lot of immigration. So a lot of non-white men, especially, were coming into the country and working alongside these white women, and they were forming relationships. And their white families of these girls were very upset about this. They didn't like this. And so they started a moral panic, and they called it the white slavery panic. And so the idea was, well, a white girl would never willingly get into a sexual relationship with a non-white man. So what must be happening is that these non-white men are kidnapping these girls and taking them away from their families, and taking them across
Mhm.
state lines. And so the Mann Act was the first anti-trafficking law, and it was specifically aimed at curbing the moral scourge of white slavery. You see any overlaps between the sex
Yeah.
trafficking moral panic, like,
Yeah.
and the laws against sex trafficking? Which, by the way, the Mann Act was pretty uniformly used against the man in interracial couples. That's what these prosecutions looks like. And today, the trafficking busts are usually of adult consenting sex workers, and the people who they get arrested and rescued, pushed into programs to force them to do other things with their lives without any like help.
Yeah.
And to avoid jail, they have to go through these nut rolls, and then their employers are fined, and we're saving women from the scourge of white slavery. So anyway, I didn't like all that. And then but one of my family members actually is a survivor of actual sex trafficking. And by the way, what actual sex trafficking usually looks like is what Diddy did to Cassie. It's people are in a relationship. It's an abusive relationship, and the male partner makes his female partner do things she doesn't want to do because he has things over her. He threatens to beat her up. He threatens to release revenge porn. He threatens to embarrass her family. Whatever it takes to coerce this girl into doing things she doesn't want to do. It looks much more like domestic violence, which is already illegal. And the problem is nobody cares. Nobody will prosecute it. But
It's
we're going to
not
create this
a
new law.
suburban 25-year-old woman being snatched out of a Target parking lot and forced to do sex work. That's not what's happening.
No, it's not
Right.
stranger danger. It's not
Exactly.
brown guys kidnapping white women from Target parking lots. No, it's abusive relationships is what it is.
Yep.
That's what happened to my family member. That's what generally happens. And so, and everything you'd want to do to prevent sex trafficking, just prevent domestic violence. Like it's the same. Do that.
But that was my point with this, and that what got me. So these charges were federal charges. So they're, the feds can only do certain kinds of prosecutions, and one of the prosecutions they can do is the transportation between states, interstate transportation, rather than intrastate behavior. But the thing that bothered me was on this sex trafficking counts, which were the more serious of the two, besides the racketeering. And it they did not, the jury, commentators say, I can kind of see it growing up in a time when I did, the jury did not believe, even after seeing the abuse, Cassie Ventura kicked, punched, dragged in a video. They did not buy the story that she didn't have free will anymore because of the abuse and the control and all those things. So the sex trafficking, when she was taken and for these freak offs, whether they said or not, the jury didn't believe that the coercion and the danger and the abuse was so great that she couldn't walk away. And that's been really the case, right? Victim blaming. We don't believe women generally. What did she do to get herself in this situation? She could walk away. She could do these things. And that's what really infuriated me about it, is that same kind of social bias, whether it's they say it or not, they probably couldn't say it. It influenced this decision, obviously. Now, I wasn't in the jury room and, all that, but that's the thing that I felt like, yeah, that's pretty problematic. And you're right. The prostitution, transportation to engage in prostitution it kind of puts it, an onus on the woman, as you're saying, we have done throughout time, right? Johns aren't getting in trouble per se, and not that they maybe should or shouldn't, but the women are the ones who are diverted into these programs and, taught to work a retail job that can't pay their bills. And um, why is it that we make this consensual relationship between adults that is transactional, and that's fine, right? We have something, whether it's you sell writing or whatever, it's a skill and attribute, something you can do to make money, right? And so I don't, yeah, I'm not happy with. That whole, because it seems like in 2025, why are we still questioning the victims of abuse and minimizing their stories?
Yeah. I mean, I think two things are going on, at least. Two things come to mind immediately. The first is that we very much have this Madonna whore complex, like as a society, where you're a woman who is virtuous and you deserve and demand protection, or you're a whore, or you're a woman who is not virtuous. You have opened yourself up to the world, and so what do you expect? Um, and so, like, you don't literally have to be a whore to be put in that category of not deserving protection. You know, there's a reason why, when in the very rare instance where a rape is reported, investigated, and makes it to court, what is the defense attorney always want to know? What were you wearing?
Where
Did
were
you
you? What
have
time was it? Was it dark? Where blah blah blah? Yeah.
Are you a virgin? Were you flirty? Because they're trying to establish that you are not a woman who deserves protection.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
And this obviously goes back to norms around uh, wanting to control women's bodies. Like, obviously, men in power have an incentive to want to control women's bodies. But one of the big drivers of the Mann Act and the white slavery panic was middle class white women who saw uh, younger sex workers as a threat to their marriages. And so they wanted to make it dangerous for women to do sex work because it was a method of mate guarding. Still true today. We still have women who want sex work to be dangerous and for working women to uh, move throughout the world unprotected, um, because they want to disincentivize something that they see as a threat to the stability of their families. And then the other thing is, we all have a very strong incentive to victim blame because it gives us a sense of safety. It gives us a sense of protection.
Yep.
Well, she got in that situation because she made bad choices. I don't make bad choices. She got in that situation because she couldn't tell that Diddy was a bad person. And I can tell when people are bad people. That gives us a feeling of like, I'm going to be safe because
Yep.
X, Y, or Z. But it
I
doesn't.
think that's a common self kind of protection thing. Whether it's, I had a situation where someone basically said, "Well, you're having this challenge with one of your kids because you work," right? And then they can say, "Well, I don't," I mean, this is kind of but that's what happened, right? My peers can look at me and say, "She works full time. She's worked full time. She's neglectful of her children. Therefore, her child has the opportunity to get into a situation that is not a good one," right? So that is kind of a self-preservation kind of thing.
It's also, I think, a
Or protection, I guess.
if you were looking at your life and, like, let's say maybe there's a part of you who would have liked to work, but you stayed home, or there's a part of you who would have liked to wear the slutty outfit, but you dress modestly, or there's a part of you who would have liked to be flirty or slutty or do sex work or whatever, but you didn't. If, you know, part of probably why you're doing these things that the patriarchy endorses is because you feel like it'll make you safer. And so if you would recognize the reality that, like, no, patriarchy puts all of us in danger no matter how much we comply, well, then it's like, well, what did I miss out on for?
Yeah.
If my kid could have gotten into trouble, even while I was, whether I stayed at home or made $100,000, if it could have happened either way, well, then why didn't I make that money? And so we've got to back justify our choices by saying, like, well, that just saved me from X, Y, and Z, when, like, maybe, or maybe you just got lucky.
It's probably more of that. So, can I make a transition if you're not ready to do this transition?
I just want to say one more thing.
Sure.
So my family member who is a survivor of trafficking reached out and she was like, "What do you think about the Diddy thing?" And I said, "I hate the prostitution angle." And she said, "I'm feeling scared." She said, "I and a lot of people," she's in communities with other survivors. We're really excited that like maybe this meant we could report, we could come out, we could be believed. There would be some kind of protection, there would be some kind of consequence.
Mhm.
And like clearly not.
Yeah.
Um and I just want to honor that's it's easy to talk about it from a personal perspective, from a theoretical perspective, but like I want to give voice to that experience of this is what it's like for at least these survivors to see this happen.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Okay,
And
let's move on.
that's what happens, right? That yeah. It's it's upsetting. So one of the recent pieces you did was about, you called it evangelical Christianity rape cult. And um I want to tie that to other like purity culture um religions, I guess we'd say, and something that came up in the news recently, but I'll let you, can you kind of just synopsize what you're positing there, because I think it's a very interesting take that people who have not grown up in those kinds of religious environments really can't understand.
Oh man.
Maybe we don't have enough time, but
No, I'll try to keep it brief. Michael Tate was part of a supergroup, contemporary Christian supergroup called DC Talk, that was really popular when I was a kid and a teenager. And then he fronted the Newsboys, which is another contemporary Christian supergroup that was also very popular when I was a teenager. And I just read an article in The Guardian that spoke to a bunch of young men who alleged that Michael Tate sexually assaulted them when they were, you know, teenagers and young men. And so they said, he would invite them to his home and give them substances. And in a few cases, either he would make a pass at them or they would wake up with their pants down and him on top of them, like bad stuff.
mhm.
And I brought up that he said when the allegations came to light, when he knew he was going to have to say something, he released a statement and he said, "I'm going to call this what God calls it, sin." And I was so incensed by that because sin covers a wide range of activities. In the Southern Baptist Church and evangelical Christianity, sin is overeating, it's using curse words, it's taking the Lord's name in
Stop
vain.
lifting a candy bar when you're 5.
Yeah, right. That's sin.
Yeah.
So, he says, "I'm going to call it sin because that's what God calls it." No, Michael Tate, you're calling it sin because it obscures the severity of, call it sexual assault.
A crime.
Um, And this not calling it what it is all part of why there's a sexual abuse epidemic in the Southern Baptist Convention, in evangelical Christianity, in these institutions, why the rate of sexual abuse is many times higher in religious schools and in public schools, because we are not calling it what it is, and we're not calling out abusers when we know that they're in our midst. And I think it's so ironic, but not at all ironic, that the entire reason contemporary Christian music is a thing is because there is a teaching in the evangelical Christian church that secular music is sinful, that secular music is a threat to your kids' safety, that if kids hear about kissing and sex in contemporary music, that they'll do it and it'll get them in hell for an eternity. And in the Guardian article, the author said that to a boy, all of the people who've come forward and made allegations against Michael Tate were naive about sex and drugs.
Of course
And
they
what
were.
you see by design, they were listening to contemporary Christian music because their parents wanted them to be naive about sex and drugs in the thinking that that would protect them. That actually put them at risk.
Yeah.
There's a reason why, when you look at sexually permissive societies that teach people, everyone, it's not stigmatized, it's not controlled, it's not shameful for adults to engage in sexual activity, for nudity to happen, for consent conference. In those societies, rates of violence are lower. That's not a coincidence. It's not a coincidence that kids who get comprehensive, medically accurate sex education, so that includes pleasure, that includes consent, they are less likely to commit sexual assault, and they're less likely to be victimized by sexual assault. It is not a coincidence that kids who don't understand what sex is, when they get sexually abused, think that that's sex and that they did something wrong. And so they don't tell anyone what happened to them, which means that abuser gets to
Perpetrator
abuse.
continues. Mm-hmm.
And then when they do report, when they do tell a parent, and that parent will shut them down often. But okay, let's say the parent does go to the leadership of the church covers for the abuser because he has a family, he has a career, he has a place in the church, and
the church
you're
has
just a
a
child.
reputation to protect.
Right. And so the point is not that the parents who raise their kids in evangelical Christianity are bad people. It's not even that the people who put these messages out there are bad people. I think they're brainwashed. I think they're wrong. But the system has created a rape cult. The system, the ideas that are central to evangelical Christianity, these ideas that certain kinds of sex are sinful and that we should not tell children about what sex is and what their bodies are, and that that all this is shameful and bad and needs to be controlled and not talked about. That's how you get a rape cult. And that's what we have in the evangelical Christian church. Like, it is a rape cult. And so, like, it's not about saying, like, you're bad as an individual for partaking in this. I partook in it for a long time. I perpetrated it for a long time. But, like, we know better now. And so now it's time to do better as individuals, as leaders. Like, let's call it what it is and either stop participating in it or work to change it. That was what I was trying to get across.
So I'm jumping in because I was a part of the Mormon Church for a long time, and I would say that there are huge similarities because of the purity culture in particular, and the same kind of thing happens. And I'm not talking about pedophilia, but I am talking about grown men who victimize older teenagers, often because there's access. And part of that is because if you think you can't be gay and you can't have consensual homosexual relationship, right, then that doesn't force. It makes people choose other avenues, which are criminal and abusive. So that's one part. But I also think that the way that the churches want to protect, and they value repentance, so they let someone come in, they deal with it within the church. The Mormon Church are not, as most churches are not, mandatory reporters. So they can send the person through the repentance process. They can say they've repented, and they can go on to have other responsibilities with youth programs or, the like, and then are able to continue to perpetrate these crimes and abuses for years and years and years. And it becomes incumbent on the child, who often, girl or boy, feels like they have done something wrong. The parents often are never told. I mean, I wasn't all that forthcoming as a teenager about my experiences with guys and stuff. I'm not sure I would have gone to my parent and said someone, crossed the line with me, and I would have put it on myself and minimized it and, talked about my own role in that thing, which is completely wrong.
Right.
So
And you look at how deeply rooted and systemic these ideas are. And I needed to get a lot of distance before I could even begin to see how all this works.
Mhm.
So both the Southern Baptist Church and the Mormon Church, and as far as I can tell, evangelical Christianity has a very strong modesty culture.
Yep.
This starts when girls are prepubescent.
No,
These
absolutely.
So the concept of modesty culture is men can't help what they think when they
Yep.
see a woman's body. And they also can't be trusted to act appropriately if they see a woman's body.
We have to be the custodians of their proper behavior.
Their proper thinking and proper behavior, that's right. So this teaches girls, prepubescent girls, that they're responsible for what the grown men around them, the boys
Yep.
and grown men around them do, which is fucked. Like
Yeah. Totally
that's it.
fucked up.
That's
Yeah.
fucked.
Yeah.
It teaches boys to act badly. It teaches girls to take on too much responsibility. It sexualizes the bodies of adult women and prepubescent girls. It normalizes pedophilia. Like,
Yep.
why are we worried about what grown men are looking at little girls for unless we're expecting that they're sexualizing their bodies? Disgusting.
Yeah.
Like, I don't know. If I had a problem with grown men sexualizing young girls, why would I choose to tell the girls to dress differently? Why would I not tell the fucking guys to get the fuck out? Like,
Yeah.
wild.
Yeah.
Um, but
Absolutely.
anyway, so um so then when the girl gets molested,
Mhm.
she immediately thinks, "Oh, well, I was dressed wrong." And the thing
Yep.
that's brilliant about modesty culture as a norm if you're a rapist is that it's incredibly subjective. What's modest? Is it a
Yes.
burqa? Is it quarter sleeves? Like,
Well, and we're having that discussion. We've talked about this, right? The Mormon garment is going from a cap sleeve to a above the shoulder, and it's a huge thing on the interwebs for ex-Mormons, Mormons. And yeah, so who defines that? When the Mormons started, the garment went all the way down to the wrist and ankle. So, yeah, who decides? Controlling men decide. Can I throw in this event because I think it's wild and we talked about it in text a little bit. So the BYU quarterback is non-Mormon. He's Jewish, I think. It doesn't matter. He's not a Mormon. But to go to BYU and BYU courts non-Mormon athletes so they can have a winning teams. So
this is
he
Brigham Young University, which
oh
is a
sorry, yeah.
Mormon college.
Yeah, right. It's the Mormon college, and Jake Retzlaff was accused of sexual assault by a woman who has since taken back that allegation. But in the course of defending that allegation, BYU, the university he's a football player for and a student for, did not take any action against him or his football, didn't do anything. But in the course of defending himself and saying that this was a consensual sexual relationship, then he admitted that he broke the school's honor code. And so I went to a Mormon college that's now called BYU Idaho, a different name back then. I signed an honor code, and part of the honor code is you will not have sexual relations outside of marriage. There's a lot of other things, drinking, the whole thing. But that one, so he defends himself against this allegation. I don't know if the allegation's true or not. I'm not here to discuss that. But they didn't take action until he said he'd had consensual sex, and then they gave him a 7-game suspension then. So when he was accused of sexual assault, the university is inextricably linked. You have to say the Mormon Church. You can't just say it's this independent college out there. Didn't do anything, and then now he's suspended. He's probably going to go. He's putting feelers out. They're going to go somewhere else. But I mean, it's a real thing, and that he's a big newsworthy case. But there are there are lots of students who are young adults, consenting young adults, who, get kicked out of school at 18, 19 because they had a sexual relationship. And now they're out of school on their ear. I mean, he's got a place to go. He's a world-class athlete. But if you're an 18-year-old child, essentially, and now you have to start from scratch because you had sex, which 18-year-olds do, right? So anyway, that's the honor code and the misguided purity culture and sort of rule following that churches like that have.
Oh my God, I have so many thoughts on this. I went to Sanford University in Birmingham, Alabama. That's SAM, not Stanford in California. Much less impressive, but a good school. I enjoyed it. It was a Baptist college. It started as a Southern Baptist college, but they lost their Southern Baptist affiliation because they allowed dancing on campus.
Oh my God.
But it was definitely dry. It was a dry campus, and it was, yeah, we had a code of conduct and it, having sex, having gay sex, drinking. These were values violations, and you could only have a certain amount and stay enrolled. And so I was such a weirdo college student. You'll be shocked to learn. I wrote for the school paper. I had an opinion column, of course. I didn't do reporting because nothing changed. And I wrote, I missed the whole Harry Potter thing because in college I wrote about how all of you guys should stop reading Harry Potter because it promotes satanic witchcraft, and that's against the Bible. So I didn't read it when I was younger, and then by the time I had said goodbye to evangelicism, I was just too old for it. And then the transphobia happened. So I missed Harry Potter for vastly different reasons at different points in my life. But anyway, while I'm inveighing against the unbiblicalness of Harry Potter, I also wrote an editorial. This was actually my only piece of reporting that I can remember doing. It wasn't an editorial. I just thought it was interesting. I thought it would be interesting to interview openly gay students at Sanford because, and I think it was actually that being gay was the values violation. I don't think it was just the gay sex.
I can totally believe that, because in the Mormon Church, being gay used to be a different level than it is today.
Yeah, and I was more progressive on being gay than witchcraft because my sister had come out of the closet by then.
Mm-hmm.
But nobody's come out as being a witch in my family yet.
No covens, no Wiccans.
No, not yet. We'll see. But anyway, so the administration actually axed the story. They would not allow the paper to publish it, and because it's a private school, they were allowed to do that.
Yeah.
And that really, I was just what a bunch of fucking pussies. Really? And that irritated
Did you
me.
put it that way when you were still a student at Sanford? That's all right.
I was definitely surprised. Was naive enough to be surprised. I really thought that I was going to be able to publish that article. That's another constant in my life is being naive and surprised. But yeah, no, I mean, I read Jesus and John Wayne a few years ago. Kristen Dumez wrote this book about the relationship between the military-industrial complex and evangelical Christianity in the United States, starting with the Cold War. And I just think it's so interesting how what is different levels of acceptable has much more to do with the CIA's vision of the nuclear family as an anti-communist project than anything that's in the Bible. So, by any reasonable interpretation of the Bible, consensual sex is less of a sin than rape. By any reading of the Bible, extramarital sex, whether it's gay or straight, is, not, I would argue, not that big a deal. I don't see a lot of biblical evidence for that being a problem, but like there's really no evidence that gay sex would be more of a problem than straight sex.
Mm-hmm.
But the federal government and the intelligence community, starting in the Cold War, thought that homosexuality and premarital sex were threats to the concept of the nuclear family, and that the concept of the nuclear family, the single family home in the suburbs with the breadwinner husband and the stay-at-home wife, was going to be such an appealing concept that it would alienate everyday Americans from communism. They would say, like, I don't want equality. I want my white picket fence.
Yeah.
So this is a very intentional project to sell this idea to the American people and to poison them on anything they saw as a threat to it or an alternative to it. And so this was everything from like living with your extended family to gay sex. Like any of it was not acceptable. And so like when you look at now to Steelman BYU, which I hate to do, but I will say he admitted to the sex and he didn't admit to the rape. So it's like, well, it does kind of make more sense for them to take action against the thing he admits he did. But I think the real answer is that being gay is more of a problem for, however you want to put it, the nuclear family, compulsory heterosexuality, whatever, than merely having sex, or than merely raping someone. Raping someone doesn't threaten the order. It doesn't threaten what is seen as normal.
Yep.
It doesn't threaten existing hierarchies. In fact, it reinforces them. It actually works in favor of existing systems of power for powerful people to rape people with less power. That's part of how you maintain the system. So of course they're not going to be threatened by or upset by or take very seriously rape. But being gay, they see as a threat. That is an alternative to the hegemonic system. And so that has to be squashed. Identifying as something that doesn't sit firmly and clearly in this order, that's the threat. So that has to be squashed. Having sex, even outside of marriage, that threatens our concept of what is sin and what is a nuclear family and how does all that work. So that has to be squashed in a way that raping someone doesn't.
That's an interesting way to put it, which is always why I like talking to you, because you've got such an insightful perspective that maybe I didn't think of for lots of reasons, right?
It's crazy. What I say is crazy.
No. I mean, I think that's important to have these different perspectives, and the power dynamic certainly is something that, we are invested as a culture in keeping a power hierarchy, no doubt.
Because it's scary. Like, even if you don't have any personal animus towards gays, right? Like, if you are taught to believe that the heterosexual, lifelong monogamous marriage with 2.5 kids with a house in the suburbs is like the only way to be happy and functional, and then you're worried your kid is gay because you've been taught that those two things are in conflict with each other,
right?
Then you're going to be scared and you're going to want to quash it and you're going to want to put your kid in conversion therapy and like do anything to, and then,
and this is not even a religious thing. I mean, that's what pops in my head right now, right? I get it. If you belong to a very conservative religion, that's one thing. It's eternal damnation. But that doesn't explain away all the parents who had trouble dealing with having a gay child, who have no religious framework that they're operating in, and they're operating on some other framework.
Yeah, I mean, I think that what growing up evangelical has done for me is to see the way that these norms are way more widespread and deeper than Christianity. Like, people who've never stepped foot in church subscribe to modesty culture, subscribe to purity culture, subscribe to patriarchy.
Yep.
Have an intuitive buy-in to complementarianism. Like, these concepts are our default culture. The difference is, in my opinion, that in churches like the Mormon Church and the Southern Baptist Church, they're just made much more explicit.
Yeah.
They're just going to come out and say, like, you have a duty to cover your body. You are pure by not having sex before marriage, and dirty by implication if you do. You know, you're a used piece of gum. Like, they're just more insistent and clearer about what is actually default. And that's what drives me up the wall, is these people who want to claim, like, American culture is so sex positive, it's so pornified, it's so, you know,
So not. It's so not.
it's so not.
The founding puritanicals, right? That thread, there is a through line that exists today, and I could go talk to people who haven't ever been inside a church, whose parents never took them to a church, and these puritanical through lines about what's right, what's moral, what's modest, all those things are just embedded in our overarching culture. Now, obviously, it's not the same as it was 40 years ago or 50 years ago, but it's still so prevalent. Why haven't we ever had a woman president? I mean, there's all kinds of things where people have these preconceived notions about roles and, you know, what's appropriate, what's not, right? I have a kid who left the Mormon church when she hasn't been to a Mormon church since she was like 8, 9, and she thinks that women on TV should not wear sleeveless tops. And I'm like, wow, that's unbelievable. And it's not, she wouldn't attribute it to that, but that has gotten some imprint in there somewhere, right?
Of course. And it's feminists too, right? It's well, I don't know why you expect to be respected if you're going to dress like that. It's like, well, why would how I dress have anything to do with whether you respect me? Do you respect men who wear shorts and sleeveless tops? Probably. Like, why?
I don't respect men who mow the lawn without a shirt on. I That's just too far for me.
I walk up to them and
that.
I rub their pecs and I say, "You were asking for it."
No, not in that way, but I don't see it.
You're just like, "No, thank you," and I'm like, "Yeah."
Yeah. No, thank you. No,
It depends on, you know, what they look like.
The man, yes. But generally speaking.
Okay, this was marketed as an AMA. We've not gotten very many questions, so please ask us questions. Otherwise, we'll I'll sing. That's my threat.
Well, we often have, I do want to throw this out while people are thinking, is there's a podcast, I couldn't remember the name when you and I were talking, going somewhere. It's called Straight White American Jesus. And what reminded me of that is they had the author of that Dudes and John Wayne book on there. And this was a few years ago, but I listened to it, and it's really good. They're former Christians, evangelicals. They were pastors, went to religious seminaries, and they are taking it down, right? So it's a great podcast. Academics,
Thanks.
both college professors.
I've tried to. I don't know. I feel like I should engage more with ex-evangelical people. I'm an ex-evangelical. I don't know why it's been difficult for me. Well, honestly, I think I'm just now getting to the point where, like, I can engage with it. I think for a long time I was just really too angry to engage with it in any kind of productive way. And then I definitely have I have very little interest in, like, the real Jesus. I mean, I feel like I know enough, you know, like, I don't need to, like, go chapter and verse and, like, have debates.
These people talk. It's very. It's a lot about politics. The influence of like this book that you cited, the influence of and the relationship between the intersection between evangelical and our politics, the whole 1980s switch with evangelicals going to being anti-abortion as a way to get votes, right? So they look at it that way. They're not, I'd say one is not, he's probably at least agnostic and probably an atheist. So it's not talking about reframing Jesus um in a more broad way. The funny thing about me and ex-Mormon content is I left the church in 2001 when I was 40, and there was no social media to have an ex-Mormon community. And so it's really interesting because of the pace and the social media to watch. Just I like to watch where people are in this process because it was so long ago for me. And but it I didn't happen kind of, I wasn't generations of Mormons, so it wasn't like someone took TNT to my whole worldview. But it is interesting to hear how that happened. And you're kind of similar, right? Your mother wasn't raised as an evangelical, so it's not like you have generations and generations.
No, yeah, neither of my parents were raised evangelical.
Yeah.
My mom was kind of like somewhat Catholic. She was confirmed, but definitely didn't go every Sunday. And then my dad, I don't think had any kind of religious indoctrination. And then they both converted as adults to evangelical Christianity. So, and a lot of people ask me, like, what's your relationship with your parents like? And I'm like, it's actually great. I mean, they are very much, the most important thing is that we have a relationship and, we are very good at agreeing to disagree. Um, I'm very lucky in that regard.
Also, I think leaving when you have people in your life, like you told me that you were very close to one of your grandmothers. So she wouldn't have been evangelical, I'm assuming. And I was, I had my mother and my aunts and uncles and all my relatives who were good people who I loved. So I didn't superimpose what a lot of Mormons do is if you drink coffee, you're bad. If you smoke cigarettes, you're bad. If you have a cocktail at dinner, you're bad. And a lot of people who are born and raised and multi-generationally, that those are sins, and people who sin are bad, you know? So
Totally.
so the deconstruction, the deconversion, whatever, is I think different for people like us who have people we love, who are good people, who do these things, and we know that that doesn't make them bad.
Yeah, I hadn't really thought about that, but I definitely think that's true. Yeah, it's hard. It's the same thing of like gay rights, right? It's hard to paint every gay person as a monster if you know people who have come out and they're gay, and you're like, oh, well, they're not a monster, so maybe the rest of them aren't either. Same for non-believers. Like my grandparents aren't monsters, so probably all non-believers aren't monsters.
Exactly. Exactly. So I think it changes the dynamic, I think, for people like us in that way.
Yeah. I read The Kingdom, the Power, and the Glory, which is very much about sounds like what that podcast is about. It's like the more recent alignment of the evangelical church around Trump and the kind of demographic and cultural pressures that created it. And and that was really good. And then I started to read The Evangelicals, which is like a, I don't know, 40-hour Audible
Mm.
on kind of the similar things of the kingdom, the power, and the glory, and Jesus and John Wayne. And it was just too depressing. Like, it's like depressing and enraging at the same time. And I'm just like, I'm not ready. I'm not ready
Yeah.
to deal
No,
with
I
this.
love the influence because I've loved politics all my life, like as
Um,
you have. And I I grew up, simultaneous to how that all changed. And um when I we had someone from the John Birch Society come and speak at our Junior Statesman Association, which I was a founding member in high school. So I mean that whole thing, not because we had also, Democrat people come and liberal people come, but um it was just looking back now with the academic analysis and the outcomes that you can see now and tying it back to things I saw contemporaneously is really interesting to me. So I love all those books that tie the evangelical movement to politics. And I often listen to that because I guess I was there and I saw it in real time. So I love it. But it might be too personal for you, you know?
Maybe, or maybe it's a generational thing. I love the Behind the Bastards podcast, and they do a lot of cult leaders,
We
as you might
never
expect.
talked about that. That is one of my favorite podcasts. And when he started was It Could Happen Here. He's a conflict journalist, and he did this whole tie between this was the right when Trump was elected initially. They did that whole, I don't know if you heard it, but they did the whole connection between what he saw in conflict countries that entered civil war and what was happening in our country. I love him and I love those podcasts. Yes.
That's funny. I am a more recent listener, and I hate the It Could Happen Here ones. I always skip those.
Yeah, it was way better at the beginning. Way
Yeah.
better at the beginning. They had one today, like on how to run a meeting right or something, and I was like, "What the hell? That's not what I signed up for." But I love the Behind the Bastards one where they feature cult leaders, and yeah, that's a good one. That's a good one.
I hope every leftist listens to How to Run a Meeting. That would be excellent. That would be great. Yeah, but the Behind the Bastards, a lot of cult leaders came out of evangelical Christianity, Shakaruni. And it was a very popular thing for several cults came out of men attracting and giving a place to ex-hippies. So after the hippie movement,
Yeah.
there were a lot of displaced young people who were vulnerable to cult leader influences. I don't know why I started on this, but that when he talks about the Jesus freak movement of the 60s and 70s,
Yeah.
there are big shades of that in the 90s and early 2000s. Jesus, they literally DC Talk, going back to what we talked about earlier, the contemporary Christian supergroup, their breakout hit was Jesus Freak.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. There are a lot of overlaps between the Jesus Freak movement of the 70s and the kind of branding of evangelical Christianity in the 90s and 2000s as countercultural.
And maybe this becomes a topic later for you because obviously I love your Substack and I would be if I wasn't, and I think everyone should read it. But the idea is so some of these cults gave the equality to people of color and equality to women in a way that there wasn't in society, right? Jim Jones, right? And I find that really interesting. And then they pray, they end up obviously praying on that. But yeah, I'm a big fan of a good documentary on a cult. I don't mean I'm a fan of cults, but I pray that, right?
Yeah, I think really charismatic people are really interesting. And I think that we're all in any kind of abusive situation, no one is invulnerable. But some people at sometimes are more vulnerable than others.
More susceptible, yeah.
Susceptible, vulnerable, yeah. How, what is a cult and what is the difference between a cult and a religion? It's not a clear delineation. It's subjective to some extent.
Yeah, and that is interesting, right? Some people for a while would call, there's a definition of a cult, and I can't remember who coined the definition. It's something that's commonly referred to when in academia when talking about that. But the
Well,
change from, pardon me?
two things they'll say is high control and coercive control.
Yeah, and high demand. So that's where people are rephrasing. So they're using that to describe things like Southern Baptists, Mormons. So because the word cult evokes, especially for older people, I think it evokes like something really off the deep end weird,
Right.
Um, but it's an interesting. I forgot. I lost my thought too. So there we go.
No, but like, I think there's a certain amount of like edgelordiness to calling, major religions and major religious movements cults. I think there is something countercultural in at least, if not the definition of a cult, in the connotation of the word cult has a countercultural connotation. But I think that that's all part of that you would differentiate based on how mainstream a, a system of thought or an organization is
Mm.
obviously serves existing hierarchies in the status quo. Um, and I think that if you look at the churches I was raised in, like the threat was eternal damnation. Like it was, you will literally spend an eternity burning in the lake of fire. So I don't know what your definition of coercion is, so your definition of control is, but I think by any reasonable definition that fits. And so, like, part of what makes a cult is that it uh, diminishes people's agency, right? Like, you separate them from their friends and family. Evangelical Christianity encourages people to only collaborate with and spend time with other believers.
Do business
You
with, socialize with. Yep. The whole.
you brainwash them. Evangelical Christianity says one thing that will get you thrown into the lake of fire is to question what the church leaders tell you about what the Bible says and what it means.
Well, and you know what? As a kid too, I mean, think about, or anybody, think about how bad it feels to have burned your forehead on a curling iron, right? And then the threat is you're going to burn in hell for eternity. So you take that, multiply it by a gazillion times, and oh my God, it's horrible.
It's terrifying.
Yeah. And that's, why it comes across that way, because everyone's, touched something too hot from since the beginning of fire. And it's a really dramatic thing to imagine. It's horrible. But even, I think I've got to find, we'll talk about it. Maybe we'll talk about cults again someday. But there's a definition, and one is like controlling what you eat, controlling what you wear, having this coercive component. So if you define it that way, there's a big discussion, on the Mormon garment and calling them underwear. Who is supposed to be controlling what kind of underwear you wear? So, I mean, that's not my argument, but that is something that comes up a lot, right, in this discussion with ex-Mormons and whether, how to define it. But I'd say, yeah, high demand, high coercion, high whatever. But because it doesn't conjure up Jim Jones and a suicide pact or a murder pact and or hippies in Eastern Oregon where the Bob Reich guy is having sex with everybody, right? So I wish I could remember that because it makes me sound stupid to not remember his name. But
Rishnesh something?
Free Rajneesh.
Rajneesh, that sounds right.
Yeah,
Who knows? I don't
yeah,
know. I know I'm
yeah.
so bad at like names and details. Okay, you guys are not asking questions and we've got 30 minutes left. Unless you want to go shorter. Um, please ask us things.
But I thought we were an hour.
We have been going on an hour and 23
Yeah.
minutes.
Yeah, no, I thought that like the window when we sent it out was now.
It's
But I'm
scheduled in for
happy to
30 minutes on my calendar, but I thought it'd be fun to go for 2. Give them a
well, I'm happy to talk and think but yeah, we'd love to hear your questions.
or thoughts.
Yeah.
What else did I write about this week? I can't even remember.
Oh, I just
Let's see if I have any more thoughts about the Diddy thing. The other thing I wanted to say was, like, I feel like well, they've done studies about who people assume when you ask them that 30% of rape allegations are um, false allegations. But then, like, when you look at the FBI statistics, it's like, I don't know, way fewer than 10% are false. And I think that's interesting. Again, I think it makes us feel safer to think that, like, oh, 30% of the rape allegations I know about are false. That I would feel safer if I believed that.
yeah, but in let's look at all the places that people are making allegations about that. There is no good reason. I mean, there might
Right.
be like a teeny tiny bit of spite, like teeny tiny spite allegations, or someone gets scared that now now they're pregnant, or now they're going to get kicked out of BYU or whatever. I mean, but I would say just anecdotally, that can't be a lot of people, because why would anybody, generally speaking, voluntarily become so exposed and vulnerable in the knowing how we treat victims of sexual assault? So I
Well,
can't
yeah.
imagine that the number of false allegations can be very large.
Well, yeah. I mean, I think the FBI's. I mean, far be it for me to take the FBI's word on anything, but below 10% seems right to
Yeah.
me. Because I mean, you have to consider as well, like, bitches be crazy. Like, sometimes people are just insane. Like,
Yep.
remember there were 2 cases that fell apart. The mattress girl, was it?
The
There was
math
a there
girl.
was a Rolling Stone. No, maybe it wasn't Mattress Girl. There was a Rolling Stone article where the reporter interviewed this woman who said that she had been, like, thrown through a glass coffee table and then, like, gang raped on the shards. And then, like, no one really fact checked it until it
Yeah.
blew up, and then people started to look into it, and the
Well,
evidence wasn't there.
yeah.
And as far as I can remember, the TLDR was this woman was just kind of on one, like, she
Yeah.
just was having a bad time,
Oh,
mental
sorry. Yeah.
wellness
I
speaking.
wasn't very nice just then.
No, I mean, just these are men go off their rockers too. They usually don't accuse women of raping them.
No,
That
but
probably
there
has to do with
was the
masculinity
case with the
norms.
actor who accused people of a hate crime because he was black,
Yeah,
and it turned out not to be true. So,
yeah.
people
People
do
do
stuff like that. Yeah,
peop
but
false accusations happen. We're not saying that it doesn't happen, but yeah, what you're saying about, like, the incentive structure, I think in men's minds, it's like, well, these women who come forward are going to get all this support and all this attention, and maybe maybe they're accusing some man who they have some beef with, and this is the way that they can punish their enemies. When, like, sure, that happens, but the vast majority of the time, the women are not believed. They are harassed. They lose opportunities. They're excluded from different things. They lose opportunities for employment. They lose friends. Their names. Miss Gwen. I'm just gonna keep talking. Their names are dragged through the mud. And I think, like, people are gonna bring up that Cassie received a settlement in her civil suit against Diddy for $20 million. Well, so they'll say, well, that's why women make these accusations so they can get millions of dollars. First of all, extremely rare outcome. Extremely rare outcome. And you pretty much have to be wealthy and well connected. I'm going to invite Gwen back in. I don't know if I have to do that, but I'm going to do it. You pretty much have to be wealthy and well connected.
My phone died.
Oh, I should have told you we were going to go 2 hours.
No, I should have paid attention.
I was just saying that, like, people are going to take the fact that Cassie received a $20 million settlement to say, like, look, here's an example of a woman coming forward because there's riches in it for her. And I was just saying that, like, first of all, this is an extremely rare event that anybody gets any money for coming forward. You pretty much have to be in a position of extreme power to get that result, to have the resources, to hire the lawyers, to get the attention, to get what it is required to getting justice. You have to be assaulted by someone who has $20 million to
Like E. Jean Carroll and Trump, right?
Yeah, like I can count on one hand, the cases where this has happened. So half of that's going to go to her lawyers. What the 10 million that's left, half of that's going to go to taxes. There are way easier ways for a famous R&B singer to get $5 million that don't require her to go to trial, go through discovery, have her name dragged through the mud, get all this harassment. So, like, even in the very best case scenario where you get some kind of monetary settlement, it's still a bad deal. Like, these people are not doing it for personal gain. And it's just interesting how, like, these beliefs persist despite the fact that they don't stand up to the evidence or just common sense. Like, misogyny is so powerful. Misogyny and victim blaming.
Can we get rid of those things? Can you do something about those things?
With the power of my platform.
Pen.
With the power of my pen. Yeah.
Oh, that's so funny that you said Blackboard, because I was talking to someone about that. Use some sort of reference like that. And I was working on a project with this, I'm going to call him a kid because he's in his 20s. And he said that he has never used a chalkboard, which makes sense. But he didn't even in school use a whiteboard because he always used, I guess, computers or tablets or, I mean, I just was like, I'm still kind of wrapping my head around that. So your Blackboard references.
I also thought it was interesting that Reuters reported that the defense acknowledged that Combs engaged in domestic violence. Like, you pointed that out as well. Like, the jury saw the video of Diddy punching her and kicking her.
And that's where they kind of left it. It was a domestic violence case. Now, that is not a federal prosecuted thing, but yeah, and that's, I mean, extreme, right? Extreme.
But it's like, we're supposed to believe that domestic violence is super rare, but also that it's, like, so normal that it wouldn't result in criminal charges and wouldn't sway the jury.
Well, I think part of it, whether it's rape or, other kind of violence, let's say in a domestic case, it's not clear cut, right? So a rape where even when you're just walking down the street, a total stranger grabs you, rapes you, beats you up, and leaves you behind a garage. Even that, the women have a difficult time, right? Because you were not in the right place. You weren't right in the right clothes. What were you doing at 10, out at 2 a.m, whatever. But in domestic violence, it's even worse because it's such a gray, dependent on how one defines it, is pushing, is cussing, is, knocking someone down. Where is the line? What did you do to provoke this action? So, I mean, that's always kind of been the thing. And why? Unless you have to get a court order because you think your life's threatened, and even then, um, why would you put yourself in that position to, go to the police station? It would be it's a humiliating situation to be in, and women, I think if they can avoid getting into the criminal justice system to deal with it, are going to. I mean, you know, evidence probably points to that over and over and over again.
Yeah, absolutely. So, like, 98% of rapes are never reported to police. So it's
Mm.
way more common that someone gets raped and never tells anyone than that they pretend
It
to have been raped when they weren't.
Yeah.
Um, that's not common knowledge.
And
And
also the backlog of
oh,
rape kits, is, especially in this day and age where we have lots of ways to tie DNA evidence to a human because of retail. I mean, just the retail DNA tests, all that, and the backlog is ridiculous. And I only say that to mean that we don't value prosecuting those offenders, because if we valued as a society, right, we would, and how we show value is money, we would put money and we would draw down the backlog, and it shouldn't be up to private organizations, right, to get these rape kits tested so that police can, or district attorneys can prosecute. And that's what part of what happens. I mean, that's crazy. That's like having to buy pencils for the public school. Okay, maybe not pencils, but
somehow they have money for new SUVs and, military grade weapons,
yeah,
uh, drug sniffing dogs. They have money for all kinds of things, but there's a resource constraint when it comes to testing rape kits. Yeah, it's
yeah,
interesting. And I think I was just really I was never like, "Oh yeah, the police are great," but even still, when I had a friend who was raped really violently, reported to police in Northern Virginia, where, like, it's not like a podunk town, it's not a
right.
super conservative place, and they were so disrespectful, dismissive, um, to say hateful is, like, to give them too much credit. That would indicate that they had some emotional investment in her, in a negative way, but it was just apathy. It was just, "I don't like you, I don't believe you. I think you're lying about this. I want you out of my face as quickly as possible, and I want you to feel bad for coming forward." Uh, any way you could communicate that, they did. And in the end, they said, we don't feel like we have a strong enough case. We're not gonna move forward. And this was after she put a lot of effort into pushing them to do so.
Hmm.
And so the untested rape kits, like, that's hard to measure. Like, we've got story
Yeah,
after story after story of individual women saying, like, and men saying, this was my experience with police. But, like, it's, how do we know what the proportion is? We don't really. But the untested rape kits is, like, hard to argue with that one. It's pretty black and white.
it's
Like,
measurable, right?
it's
You
it's
can literally
straightforward, it's
count that.
measurable. It's the evidence of the larger systemic problem. But I will say, I mean, the clearance rate for all crimes is like 50%. In San Francisco, for example, we have very low rates of violent crime, but very high rates of property crime.
Hmm.
And people have just stopped reporting property crimes to police. They have absolutely no expectation that the police are going to take any action whatsoever.
Right.
Um, And so, while I would never deny or try to downplay police misogyny and police, I mean, the whole way that we conceive of, talk about, measure, and deal with crime in this country is extremely power-based. So, like, wage theft is way more widespread and common than any other kind of theft. Like, on a who does it, how many people does it impact, the dollar amount, by any way you want to measure it, wage theft is a bigger problem than any other kind of theft. And yet, what has more prosecutions, what gets more attention in the media, like all these. So it's very aimed at enforcing and maintaining the current hierarchy. And cops are just like lazy and unaccountable, like for all crimes. And I'm not gonna say to their credit, but like you said, rape is a hard crime to prove. You have to prove intent.
Yep.
You have to prove that the victim did not consent and that the perpetrator did it despite knowing that the person was not consenting, and that's difficult.
And right. And you're not there. You don't, I mean, consent, right? We women, we would believe that you can withdraw consent at any time, right? You don't have to continue. You can withdraw consent at any time. And how you define that, and there are no witnesses but you and the perpetrator, how do you even, unless, there are obviously cases where people are violently assaulted and there's lots of other physical evidence just in addition to a rape kit. But even in that case, like with your friend, they don't really want to prosecute those kinds of cases.
No, no. We have quotas around drug arrests, but we don't have quotas around rape prosecutions, rape
Yeah.
investigations, rape arrests. Huh. How interesting. Like, what's the bigger threat to the safety of a community?
Yeah.
Anyway, so I think that's important to keep in mind. But I also think, according to Dr. Alice Evans, and I don't have access to data to contradict her, the biggest predictor of violence against women is violence overall. So countries that have a lot of violence against women have a lot of violence. And countries that have low rates of violence against women are less violent. And so I think,
So here we are.
I think to me, one of the things, I think that sex and gender are very interesting and important on their own, especially because they're so, like, made to be more special in, like, a bad way and a good way in this culture than I think is useful. But I also think that when you look at sex and gender, you see this. There's a reason that countries that are more sexually permissive and more gender egalitarian are less violent than countries that are more have high rates of oppression of women and stigmatization and control over sex. And and it even, like, the men also do better. Besides the fact that, like, you want a lower rate of violence, a lower rate of violence actually disproportionately benefits men, because no matter what the rate of violence against women, the rate of violence against men is higher. Men are the primary perpetrators and victims of male violence, of violence. So, but also more gender equal societies, there's a lower male suicide rate. Like, men are healthier and happier. Like this, and but and so like I said, I think sex, and gender are really interesting and important on their own. But I think they're also really tied into everything else you would care about, and that, like, these ideas that are fucked up around sex and gender, the idea of, like, personal responsibility that is confused by purity culture and modesty culture, the idea of, female autonomy that are, violated by these things, the idea of consent, like what constitutes consent. Um, like, we can see very clearly how they're fucked up around sex and gender. But when they are fucked up around sex and gender, they're also fucked up around everything else, right? Like, we don't respect the autonomy and consent of people who have less power, relative to people who have more power in when it comes to rape, when it comes to quote unquote trafficking, and when it comes to wage theft, right? Like, these concepts of like individual rights and autonomy, uh, they're of a piece, like they're tied together. And so I think it's helpful to talk about sex and gender because, especially when you grow up in a high control ideology community, it's just very explicit. The ideas that erode that autonomy and those rights and the
Well, and I don't know what that guy's name is, but that whole the guy who runs um the Quiver Full movement, and he has like homeschool
Goddard,
lessons. Yeah, and they have like
Bill
this
Goddard.
Bill Goddard, yeah. And he has this like graphic where the umbrella, the top level is God, and then there's the husband, and then there's the wife, right? It's not even verbally explicit, it is visually explicit. Now, I'd say that in a church like the Mormon church, especially in the last 20 years, they're not explicitly saying, but they used to in the temple explicitly say, right? The husband follows God, and then the woman covenants to follow her husband as he follows God, right? The words have changed. I haven't been to the Mormon temple in, 25 years or whatever. But that in that setting, it was very explicit that hierarchy, and that it's very visual, like the Goddard thing with the umbrella. And maybe we don't do that as explicitly, but even like in the workplace, right? There, and it's not just men, women and men in a position of power expect to be able to control the behavior of their subordinate employees with staying longer and getting a project done and redoing it. I worked for a guy who he was a colonel, and every Sunday, we were like at his house revamping slides when he had to brief somebody over and over and over again. And then, at the end, it makes absolutely no difference, but it was a control thing, right? And
Absolutely.
yeah, and it's not always it doesn't mean that the person's not necessarily a nice person or a good person. It could be cultural. If you're in the military paradigm, that culture is very strong. Um, but it definitely exists. And I'll say generationally, I worked at a company and I had a couple of people who worked in my group and they reported to me. And I just couldn't get why I was the first person in and the last person out. And they were like, they eventually came to me and said, you know what, when you do that, it sends a message to us that we're always late and we're always leaving early, and that is not a good message. And I was really kind of irritated that they'd come sauntering in at 9 and leave at 5 and didn't, and they didn't owe the company any more than doing their job, and they were doing their job. But in my, generational brain, I was like, or just my people pleaser nature or whatever it was that was making me do that was, and I've done, you know, most of my career was sending a message that was just really messed up. They did call me on it, which was good.
And that's nice. That's nice that they felt comfortable
Yeah.
saying how they felt to you. I will say for evangelical Christianity that, and the Mormon church as well, you brought this up one time when we were talking, and I thought it was a really good point, that yes, the man is the head of the household, which reflects what they think God created in terms of hierarchy. Men are in charge, women are subservient, children are under women. But my churches and your churches did teach men that they're not supposed to abuse that power. That, yes, you have authority, but you also have responsibility to be kind, to not abuse, to be gentle, and put the needs of your family above your own. So that's beautiful.
There was
It's a beautiful
kind of a
teaching.
righteous dominion sort of.
Yes.
Yeah.
The problem with creating a situation in which one party has less power than the other is that it then depends on the person who has more power, or the group who has more power, to not abuse that power. And that's what we see in, like, that's kind of the difference between, like, capitalism and Christianity, is that, like, capitalism doesn't even have that expectation that you wouldn't abuse your power. Like, it's actually the opposite, where, like, if you don't abuse the leverage you have over your employees to get them to come in early and stay late, then, like, the board is going to take pressure from the shareholders to replace you with someone who will. But again, it does depend on the people in power, the husbands in the case of the church being good. And I think probably most of the husbands are good, or want to be good at least. I think most of the husbands in evangelical Christianity, just like the men in masculinity, are good, well-intended people, and that the people who really benefit from these systems aren't everyday men. It's the bad men.
Yeah.
The bad men who then take that construct of I should be in charge, and they ignore the whole I have a responsibility to be a good person. And Gothard is such a perfect example of that, where, like, I'm sure most of the husbands in the Gothard church, like, did their best. Bill Gothard, I listened to this podcast about this girl talking about growing up in the Gothard cult.
Mhm.
That's what she calls it. I don't disagree with her.
Yeah.
His brother, so they made their money a bunch of different ways, but one was through curricula. They would
Right.
just pump out books about how to raise your children, how to be a good spouse, how to eat right, like,
And a
every
whole
part of your life.
homeschool curricula that
Homeschool,
yeah.
self-help, all this, books. The majority of them were written by Bill Gothard's brother. So Bill Gothard's brother, like, lived on this compound where he would just crank out books. And so to keep the books coming, Bill would send him, this was before the internet, reams of pornography, like, ship him reams of pornography, and young girls from the church. So if you were a young girl in the church and you were picked, Bill Gothard would say, your daughter is just really exemplary, and we want to reward her by sending her to, the compound where she's going to get the opportunity to gain skills by being an intern for
Yeah.
the brother.
God, that's disgusting. Ugh.
And that's the thing, is, like, are the systems you're setting up making it easier for bad guys to do bad stuff and get away with it?
Absolutely. Right.
Yeah.
There's no question, right? So that's and having to rely, and that's also one of the things that happens, right? In these organizations, people are taught to be trusting. And so they let their guard down with these kinds of people in a way that we wouldn't in any other circumstance. And because of that, it leaves people vulnerable to being exploited, to being assaulted, all the things bad things that can happen to people, to be extorted, to be, sign over. The money that people sign over to people, and all of that is because and Utah, that whole multi-level marketing thing, and all the susceptibility financially, I think is they just wouldn't do the due diligence they would normally do in any other situation.
And it's so, like, self-perpetuating, right? Because some of this is capitalism. People have always kind of moved to opportunity. And so, but with the idea of the nuclear family, these people are moving without their extended family. So whereas they might have moved the whole gang to where the jobs are, now it's just the couple and their kids, which means they don't have their community of origin and their parents to tell them, here's how you're supposed to parent. Here's how you're supposed to be a spouse. Here's how you're supposed to get on in the world. This is what morality looks like. And so they're kind of adrift. They're not getting it from the popular culture. And so they're
These
very
people
susceptible
to
to
fill that void. Yeah.
these gurus who are going to say, I have not just answers, but the answer to every question in your life.
Oh, and we've talked a lot, so I don't know where I said this, but I converted to the Mormon church, wanted to be baptized. I had to wait. My mother wanted me to wait a year, but about a year after my father died. So my father died when I was 10. We had a teeny tiny, literally teeny tiny little family. A grandmother, a couple of uncles, one first cousin on one side, an aunt and a first cousin on the other side. So I come from a very teeny tiny little family. My father's dead, and the lady who babysat us after school after my dad died, they were Mormon. And so we would go to church and activities with them. And the theology that your family goes on forever, and when you're dead, you're not dead. And when I would see my father again, and having this sense of community for an outgoing person like I am, who comes from a very reserved family, it was like, I mean, I'm gonna say this, it sounds trite, but it really was, in my view, a godsend. And there are lots of things about it I don't regret at all. I had lots of really great opportunities and fun. I made friends. I could be a part of something that I didn't have in my own family. We didn't have house guests. We didn't have host dinner parties. We didn't have, I mean, I had a very non-social mother and family. And so for someone like me to have church dances and parties and activities and be on committees to plan events and learn how to do all of that was just what I needed, right? But then it didn't take long for me to realize that I didn't believe the origin story or the theology and all of that. But I still feel like there were aspects about it that were really, really great for me. And I still can admit that. Can I look back and see how purity culture was damaging, how it damaged my self-esteem because I made out with a boyfriend, at his house after school when his parents were home from work? There are all these things that it did were damaging and harmful. Um, but there were still also aspects that as a young person who needed community, I think probably that's the thing I miss the most, is because I've moved around a lot. And when you're in the Mormon church, especially, you don't have to go hunting down a church family, right? Like you do in other religions. You get there and you live in this house and you go to that ward at this time, and you have, you know, 300 people that or 600 people, whatever the number, right away. So, but I trusted things, right? I hired babysitters right away. We moved to a new place for a job, and I would hire a babysitter. I just trusted that that kid, whoever the babysitter was safe,
Right.
right? And who knows whether it was a kid babysitter or someone who did daycare for me because, you know, and I took my kids to their house, I just assumed that they were safe. And the funny thing is, I was a journalist. I knew in th- that they could be as unsafe as anybody. But I also thought, like a lot of people, we feel like we're going to trust that this is an okay and safe place, right? Because of the way the environment and the messaging is, even though there were times when I didn't do the same kind of due diligence that I should have because they were part of the community. And, I I don't think that my kids were hurt by that in terms of none of them have ever come to me and said that they were treated badly or abused in any way. But that doesn't mean that it didn't happen. I also know that.
No, but like it is safe. I mean, that's why we have communities, because if you act real bad a bunch of times, you get a reputation and then you
Yeah.
don't get to babysit anymore. So it's not foolproof, nothing is, but it is safer, all else equal, to use someone for whatever that who has a reputation to maintain, who has established a reputation and wouldn't want to lose it. That's it's a safety mechanism. It's part of why we have communities. And
So
yeah,
yeah, social pressure is something.
it's
It
super
does work
important.
in a lot of ways. Yeah.
Reputation effects are super important. And I feel the same way. I miss many, many parts of evangelical Christianity. Well, I miss many, many parts of the people who I knew in evangelical Christianity in my churches, the adults who made sure that we had a Christmas every year
Yeah.
and who paid for us to go to summer camp and showed me what it is to give time and money to people you don't necessarily expect to ever get anything back from. I appreciated that, the church youth groups were a huge part of my social life.
Mhm.
When I would go to school, I was a weird kid, shockaroony, and people were not always nice to me. They weren't mean, but at church there was a social obligation to be nice, and it was nice, and it made me feel safer to come up
Yeah.
to people and, like, try to be a part of things, and so that was super important for me, and, um,
Same with me. Yeah.
so s and so I don't wanna say, like, "Oh, it's worthless." It's not. There's a lot that's beautiful about it, to the point where I was part of a very active sex positive community in San Francisco, and we would get together. Every month we'd have an orgy, and every week there'd be some kind of event, and there was an active Facebook group, and yada yada. And I was like, you know, what I really want this group to be is just a little more like a church. Like if we can just like, just formalize it a little more. Where like when somebody has something good or bad happen, like we do a meal train for them, and we
Yeah.
do these things that we. And I'm also a lot less hard on the church with the information that in the United States of America, churches really are the engines of civil society, good, bad, or indifferent. Like
Yeah.
that's what they do, and that's what they are. And we need civil society. We need community. We need these things. And
Yeah,
so
because we take the
churches,
God part out of the church community. And, people have said you could go to, like, Unitarian, is
Unitarian
there, like,
Universalist.
yeah, um, but that's not it either. It's something, and that's why why I moved to Huntsville, because I want to live somewhere where I knew people, where I had a sense of community, and we knew lots of people here because of our previous work and where we've lived, and because I wanted people to call me when they needed something, and I wanted to know I had people to call if I needed something. So, like, my friend had knee surgery, and I met her here. Part of that, what's a where we used to live anyway, it doesn't matter. But part of this community. And so we have become friends. And when she had knee surgery, I went and stayed at her house and helped her out for a couple days. And
Love it.
that's the part, right? That's the thing that I miss and want to be a part of, is feeling like I can be of help to other people, and that there are people I feel comfortable asking for help from when I need it. And I'm not good at asking for help. And so it's just kind of built into those church cultures, and they even have, like, my sister's the Relief Society president of a ward, Mormon church ward, and that's her job, right? Is to coordinate, one of her jobs is to coordinate the help that people need. And that's not a bad thing.
I think it's the older I get, the more convinced I become that that's it. It's the most important thing. It's the bedrock. It is, other people are the meaning of life.
Yeah.
And I think that's as good a place as any to stop since we're past 9. Thank
Yeah.
you for staying on for 2 hours with me.
Oh,
Thank
I
you
loved
all.
it, and thanks everyone for joining and listening, and, I just and, you know, Cathy's work is great, get behind the paywall. I'm here as part of it is I'm here as an advocate for Cathy's, uh, independence as a journalist, and I really, really mean that.
Thank you. Hire Gwen for all your writing needs. She's a gun for hire. She's incredibly talented. Thank you guys for coming and staying. We're going to be doing this weekly. Sometimes we'll have guests, sometimes it'll just be us. Come with your questions next time. Have a great night. Thank you.
Good night. Bye.